people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. What was Caroline Dubois' defense of the WBC title against South Korea's own Bo Mi Re Shin? What turned out to be a tougher test, a tougher ask than perhaps Caroline Dubois anticipated. It was established early that Caroline Dubois was the better boxer of the two, but I think we all knew that going in. What I think took Caroline by surprise is that her power did not have the effect on Bo Mi Re Shin that it's had on other girls, other fighters. Because Bo Mi Re Shin was not hard to find in there, and she wasn't hard to hit. She was noticeably slower than Caroline Dubois and more disorganized. She was able to take the power, take the punches, and keep the pressure on. To the point where she put Caroline Dubois on her back foot in spite of all the punishment that she was taking. She forced Caroline to give up ground, move and punch, set traps, set up counters. Successfully, I might add. This is a fight that Caroline Dubois won comprehensively, won wide on the scorecards, though not before finally unraveling towards the tail end of it. Having spent all of her power, all of her energy reserves, she was running on fumes in the 10th and final round, where Bo Mi Re Shin continued to pour it on, and Caroline Dubois found it hard to keep her off. She had nothing left. The indictment. Caroline Dubois chose to fight a super featherweight in Bo Mi Re Shin, who she brought up to lightweight, instead of unifying titles with her fellow champion, Beatriz Ferreira, who was willing to stand in, who was willing to fight her. She was available, but this is what Caroline chose, and we see why. I mean, if this is what you had to go through with a super featherweight, what would you have had to go through with Beatriz? So on one end, you say that this was actually good experience for Caroline Dubois, who's young and really is still just getting started. It was good experience, but it doesn't help that she's a loudmouth. It doesn't help that she's a chatty patty. And what she thought, that she was going to plow through the entire lightweight division, bullying girls that don't have the same amateur background that she does, so that she can clam up and turn pallid whenever Beatriz Ferreira is mentioned, because she doesn't keep the energy for Beatriz that she keeps for other fighters, other champions like Terry Harper. Terry must have been watching the action, watching Caroline Dubois languish in the 10th and final round, struggling to stay on her feet, and Terry said, "Hey Caroline, were you too tired to give me a shout out tonight?" To which Caroline angrily responded, "Are you being for real right now? I'll give you more than a shout out if you want, bum." So immediately after the fight, after the judges' scorecards are read, and they're doing a post-fight interview, Caroline looks dejected. She didn't call anybody out, just like Terry Harper said. She was lucky to make it out of that round. The 10th and final round of a fight that she did win comprehensively, but unraveled towards the end. A super featherweight caused Caroline Dubois to unravel, so maybe she needs to pump the brakes? It's what I always talk about. Pressure fighters aren't neat and tidy, aren't as fundamentally sound as some other fighters, but their awkwardness can cause an otherwise well-schooled boxer to unravel, because it'll be a test of their fitness more than their finesse. The finesse will hold up for a while, so long as their fitness holds up, and Caroline Dubois didn't. Now, you don't want to go turning a mountain into a molehill because a young fighter, a young champion, had a hard fight. But this isn't just a young champion. This is a loudmouth. This is a boisterous fighter, a disrespectful one, who's regularly taking shots at everybody else, so that when you struggle, people are gonna take shots at you. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Airing out your dirty laundry that belongs in a hamper. And that rhymed. I do think that was a good learning experience for Caroline Dubois. As a young fighter, a young champion, it was good that she made it out. She survived. But you're not convincing anyone that you're queen of the castle when you continuously avoid Beatriz Ferreira just to look bad. Look bad with a super featherweight. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, veteran boxing scribe Stephen Kimothy said, "As someone who still believes that belts matter and coined the term, my biggest problem with the sanctioning bodies, some much more than others, is that they simply don't follow their own rules." Addressing what appears to be the Cold War between power broker Turki El Sheikh and the World Boxing Council. In essence, they really become partners with certain promoters and/or very protective of star fighters. If they merely had the gumption to go by their own regulations, you would have forced promoters to work together and created more natural activity for boxers, but instead certain fighters don't get mandatories called for them or are allowed to not even defend their titles for years, and this stuff impacts everyone and their rankings. I can see why a lot of people have no sympathy for them. They did it to themselves. Steve seems to have just as much criticism for the alphabets as either I or you, but he does insist they still matter. The belts matter. How do you make that make sense? At a time where their value seems largely intrinsic, you have to remember that for those no-name fighters that don't have a built-in fan base, like say a Puerto Rican fighter, or a Mexican fighter, a British fighter. For all of those outliers and hot potatoes, high-risk, low-reward guys, sometimes their only chance to get at a meaningful fight is through the alphabets and the mandatory process, climbing up those ranks and fighting in those eliminators in the hope that one day the sanctioning body will order a fight between you and their champion. For some guys, that's their only chance to land a big-time fight with a big-time opponent. But when the sanctioning bodies fail to perform this essential function, really their only function, with the same consistency that they collect their sanctioning fees, you start to wonder why you even have them around. What are they good for? Or when their mandates don't even make sense or come at inopportune times that seem to service some other agenda. What are they good for? But when the sanctioning bodies start acting in their own best interests instead of the fighters that are paying them sanctioning fees, you start to wonder, what are they good for? Aside from taking 3% of a fighter's purse whenever some version of their title is involved. All this because they ordered Dimitri Bivol to fight David Benavidez? Not just. Sebastian Fundora has been WBC champion at junior middleweight much longer than Dimitri has been WBC champion at light heavyweight. So how is it that you order a mandatory for Dimitri before you ordered one for Sebastian? Huh? After Sebastian became WBC champion, upsetting Tim Tszyu a year ago, you didn't bog him down with a mandatory right away like what you're doing now with Dimitri. Nope. You were gonna let Sebastian fight Errol Spence Jr., who's coming off a loss at 147 and has done absolutely nothing at 154. You didn't bother him, but you bothered Dimitri. It's not consistent. Oh, you'll collect sanctioning fees from fighters consistently, but your mandates show no consistency. It's like what Steve Kim said. You play favorites and make the rules up as you go along. Brazenly, I might add, because who's going to police them? Turkey. So that when you seemingly get into a row with a power broker with enough money to make almost any fight happen, and you're under threat of being expunged, expelled. Some people think what Turkey's trying to do is get rid of the alphabets. You'll garner little sympathy and little support from the boxing community at large, because a large chunk of them are sick of you, sick of your favoritism, your biases, your backdoor deals with promoters, your inconsistencies. They're tired of it. They're starting to wonder if the sport of boxing wouldn't be better off without these sanctioning bodies. My thoughts. I agree with Stephen Kimothy. Belts matter, and we often talked about this in our days at UCLA.
You didn't go to college.
It's not the point. I understand the intrinsic value of these belts. It's because of the history attached to them and what fighters in previous eras held those same titles, the lineage, as well as the process it takes to get there. It takes to get one. It does matter. Take away all the belts in the Fury versus Usyk fight, and what is it really? Take away all the belts in the Better Be versus Bivol fight, and what is that? The reason we know it's the best versus the best is because all the belts have been collected, and now there are only 2 men left standing. Done right, it's the ideal build-up for such a fight. The ideal backdrop, adding to a fight's prestige. That's the intrinsic value that I was talking about. But this is so long as the sanctioning bodies aren't standing in the way aren't being a hindrance. These criticisms you often hear in reference to the sanctioning bodies apply to some more than others, namely the WBA and the WBC, who are simultaneously the least consistent but the most intrusive. Andy Hirioka's been the mandatory challenger to the WBA title for a while now. How does Gary Antoine Russell get his crack at the apple before Andy, who fought in the Eliminators, who is the mandatory challenger? Well, Gary was coming off a loss. Doesn't make sense. How is Dmitry Bivol, only a few weeks out from becoming WBC champion, already bogged down with a mandatory where Sebastian Fundora has been champion for a year without one? Doesn't make sense. And when it stops making sense, when it stops being structured, well, that defeats the purpose of having sanctioning bodies. The whole idea is to give boxing a pecking order, structure, hierarchy. That's the point. If you're not going to follow that golden rule, then boxing doesn't actually need you. That when the World Boxing Council tries to cut ahead in the line, ordering their fight, knowing they're not next in the rotation, what the hell are you doing? My stance on the whole goddamn thing, and the potentiality of Turkey trying to get rid of the alphabet organizations, is that I, as a boxing fan, I don't necessarily want to see them all go away. I just want them to do a better job. Do a better job of giving boxing a pecking order, a hierarchy, and work together. Don't get in each other's way. They should come up with a new rule. I propose that if there's a unified champion at a given weight, whatever alphabet organizations that fighter holds titles with should get together and stage an eliminator with their highest ranked contenders or their interim champions to crown the mandatory to the unified champion. You shouldn't be able to bog a guy down this much. But if you got a guy who's got both the WBO title and the WBC titles, those two alphabet organizations should order their highest ranked contenders to fight each other, irrespective of who their promoters are or what platforms they fight on. And this is what Steve Kim is talking about, showing the gumption to force these promoters to come to the table. Because if you're not doing that, then what the hell are you doing? What leverage would they have to force them to come to the table? If their fighters don't, they lose their spot. They lose their shot at the big time. If you want to fight for the title, you have to play ball. This works to keep the fighters active, keep the fighters fighting in meaningful fights, significant fights that are about something, while alleviating the pressure on a unified or undisputed champion to fight mandatory after mandatory after mandatory. This is how the belts end up getting fragmented. This is how you end up with 2, 3, 4 champions at a given weight, and all it does is confuse people, confuse casuals. It's not about getting rid of all the alphabets, at least not for me. It's about the alphabets doing a better job to produce a better result, a better sport that looks more like a sport, less like a business. Because you can say that boxing is a business crap all day till you're blue in the face. The people are here to see a sport. They're paying money to see a sport. I mean, every sport that is a sport is a business, but that doesn't stop them from being a sport. It's only in boxing that you see this. And the shit's gotta stop. I think the sanctioning bodies, they need to get their act right. And if pressure from Turkey results in that, I'm not against it. Finally, in men's super middleweight news, Edgar Berlanga blasts Eddie Hearn for disrespectful co-main event slot as free agency looms. After dropping a unanimous decision to Canelo Alvarez in September, Edgar Berlanga still enjoyed a victory lap in Puerto Rico and was supposed to headline his own show on the island this month. But instead of a massive platform in front of his people, Berlanga will be stuck playing second fiddle on March 15th against Jonathan Gonzalez Ortiz at the Caribe Royale in Orlando, which is home to a heavy Puerto Rican population. The 10-round super middleweight contest will serve as a co-main event to the Matchroom boxing card on DAZN, headlined by the middleweight matchup between Austin Williams and Patrice Volney. We were scheduled to fight a main event fight on March 8th at El Coliseo de Puerto Rico in front of 18,000 people. Berlanga told The Ring in an interview, "We were going to sell it out. Those were the talks ever since November, but you know, being that I'm going to be a free agent after this fight, the contracts they were giving us for that fight We just didn't like it. We couldn't come to an agreement at all. It's sad because I have a big fan base, especially after the Canelo fight.
What the hell did you do in the Canelo fight that would have grown your fan base? You spent 36 minutes running from him.
He said my fan base grew out of this world. They put me in Orlando, which is little Puerto Rico. I feel bad for my people. I didn't want to do any extensions. I'm a superstar. I want to make my own moves and not have anyone behind me acting like they are my boss.
Yet you're relying on other people's money to line your pockets.
March 15th was the only date available for us for a quick turnaround. I didn't want to wait any longer to finish the contract. I said, y'all want to give me a Puerto Rican guy as the co-main event? I'll take that. Sometimes you have to take one step back to take two steps forward.
No, what it really is you lost a lopsided decision in that fight with Canelo. I don't think Edgar won a single round of that fight, yet you're still expecting Matchroom to pay top dollar and roll out the red carpet when you have every intention of leaving.
I'm 100% upset with Eddie Hearn, said Berlanga. I don't think it's cool. It's disrespectful to me and my fans.
What, that you don't want to sign an extension with Matchroom so they're not going to waste their money on you? Because that's what it is.
My fans are everything to me. They are the ones who make us rich, buying tickets and pay-per-views. I'm upset with Hearn because we had good business. I never did anything to backdoor him. I feel that we should have made the contract for March 8th fight happen, regardless of free agency.
You think you're slick, you and your manager. Most of these fighters do. When you don't sign an extension with Matchroom, what that communicates to them is you have every intention of going somewhere else. I heard a rumor that Edgar is going to MVP after this.
So why should Matchroom waste their money on a fighter who's gonna leave them anyway? Edgar continued, I feel that business is business at the end of the day. We should always do good business. If you do good business with me, right, and I become a free agent, we never said, hey, we're never gonna sign with you again. You get what I'm saying? We could have re-signed and fought. There is no hate. But you're doing stuff like that, then it's like, cool, I see where you're at.
No, you think you're slick.
I see where your mind is at. When it's all said and done, that shit looks bad for my brand. It's not something that is going to break my heart or I'm going to go out there and crash out. You know how boxing is. I have to take the good with the good and the bad with the bad. I just have to go handle my business and this guy early and show out. And then, free agency tour starts.
And I already heard weeks ago that a pit stop on that tour is signing to MVP. I've no doubts that the people at Matchroom may have heard the same rumors that I heard. So when you hear that in your Matchroom,
you're not gonna break the bank for this kid. Not for him to leave and go somewhere else. Anyway, Edgar Berlanga has a star attitude without star skill set, without star ability.
It's not like you're gonna molt this guy into a pound-for-pound fighter. The people at Matchroom know that.
The most you could have been was a heavy bag for Canelo Alvarez to punch on and let them make some money. They've done that. At this point, it's just about completing the contract and moving on, going your separate ways. And if you can find somebody else to pay you top dollar for those lackluster performances, go ahead. More power to you. Game the system wherever you can. But when you can't game Matchroom, that's not them disrespecting you. That's them being ahead of the curve because they know what you're doing. You want to make off like a bandit. And what's consistent with Edgar Berlanga are situations like this one. It happened at Top Rank, and that's why they cut him loose.
I remember those rumors.
And now we see this. It's more of the same from a guy who fancies himself a star fighter, but isn't actually a very good one.